Hello, and welcome back to these bare bones conversations with myself, Corey Hess. And today we have part two of Mark Doyu Albin. Um, please watch the first video, um, part one with Mark. I think you're going to get something out of that. So that's really wonderful. Welcome, Mark. Welcome, Yusan.
Hey,
Hey.
we are again. Good to see you, Corey.
Great to see you.
Great.
Okay. I think there's a lot to talk about, so I want to jump in. Um, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how your training developed at Sogenji and with Shodo Harada Roshi, and maybe get a little bit into your process with koans and how that was like, what that was like in the life there. And also maybe touch upon, if you could, what it was like to be the head monk. And I think somehow you really shined with this leadership role. So I'd love to hear about that.
Mm. Yeah, like I said, the first time when you arrive, you have so little responsibility other than doing what you're told, which is a big responsibility. And staying healthy through the seasons, and then slowly responsibilities kind of come. And my first sort of deeper calling into things, although I was sure liking the sincerity and so forth of the practice. But what happened was that the Roshi needed a driver, and he had a bad experience with the driver before, who was a Westerner who wasn't very good at driving on the left side of the road and got near the road, but actually hit the car door of the Roshi. And so I got a shot at it, right? And he liked something about that. And I had a stint where I was really driving him a lot. And then I got a job in the room next to his as the Fuzui in the
Sure.
temple. That's the one who answers the phone and greets the guests and takes care of the tea room and often drives the Roshi. So I got used to this, Mark, Mark, kind of. And I would, it was, it started to become a sense more that I wasn't doing something abstract. I was really involved in what was happening in the temple. And I think he started to see something in me that was possible, and started giving me more responsibilities. Um, I wanted to go home after a year to think about things, and the Roshi contemplated that, and he said, in Japan, we say, sit on a stone for 3 years. Ishi no ue sane. No? And so I stayed 3 years before I went home. And when I said, well, 3 years are up, I'm ready to go home, he said, yeah, I mean, I wanted to go home and think about my experience and sort of see my family and so forth. And he said, yeah, go home, and then when you come back, we'll ordain you there. And I didn't understand the word for ordination, no, tokudoshi. And I went, okay, I get to go home, right? Who cares about the tokudo? And then I asked, the translator Chisan what tokudo was afterwards, just to kind of fill out the information, and she told me ordination, no, like this is not, I'm free. I'm a free Zen man, like doing this and kind of getting my energy together, and then the Roshi picked up on my resistance, and we had a very interesting sounds, interview pattern after that, where I just simply wasn't given very much acknowledgement, or I didn't really exist. And he would often say, you really don't have what it takes to be an ordained monk anyways. And I'm like, of course, like, well, no, I do. I mean, you see that I do. I just don't want to. It's like, no, you don't have it. So kind of went like that for about half a year actually, and it brought up a lot of deeper stuff about being dependent on the system and questioning my future and so forth. But he basically, I pinned him down just before I went home and said, I really need to know. I need to know. I don't want to be so dependent. And he looked at me and he said, well, he shook his head like, God dang it, why do I have to say these things? He doesn't like to say too much. And he said, when you ordain, the first 10 years are very difficult. And the next 10 years are slightly easier. And then you do what I do. And I thought, I kind of said, okay, in my heart and soul, I'm gonna give it a shot. And
Yeah.
I went home and, my parents flipped out. Like, really going back there? It's like, yeah, you're gonna be a monk? Yeah. We don't understand. And so it was really against the nature and understanding at that time. Nobody really was getting that. But the Roshi had convinced me that that was a good direction for me, and it was.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
so that was ordination. Excuse me.
No.
Okay. And then he started giving me like more important jobs,
Yeah.
and there I was in these very stiff robes. The Jishadio, knocking over the keisaku every time I served the tea, and getting scolded by the head Japanese monks there at the time, and just making a real mess of it. At the time of my ordination, I had gained again. Told you last time about gaining the weight. Well, I gained again the same, like I don't know, 10 pounds or something. See pictures of my ordination. I really was overwhelmed with the situation. I ordained on Rinzai Day in January. It was a very cold, very austere experience.
Yes.
And at some point, he asked me to be the assistant head monk, the Jokei, and then that was strange. And then I was head monk, and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was again. The head monk usually also decides the work, right? The work that the sangha will do. So I would have to memorize because we're all sitting zazen. I would have to think in my head what 30 people, sometimes more, are going to do, and then announce it very clearly and sharply at the end of breakfast. Give each person a very clear assignment. And yeah, the Roshi would listen to that, and then he would say, "No, everyone's gonna do this, not that," and just really screw me up
Yeah.
on as much as he could, and yeah, just did it the Japanese way. You watch him, and then the next day you're doing it, right? I did that with one day at the Zazenkai when the public came in. I would play the drum for him, and he would lead the zazen, lead the exercises, and he just made me one day get up and lead the exercise in front of 60 Japanese people in Japanese, and he stood next to me, corrected every word that I did not say. Yeah, it was humiliating in front of these 60 Japanese people. And I'm like angry for a week. And what happens the next Sunday? He's not there. I lead the entire group. I give tea to the group. And it went very well because he just instilled that experience in me with such a directness, right? And so this is
Yes.
how he just went on and learned in this rote, not through explanation ever, right? Just
Yes.
see him do it, and then one day you're just doing it, and you don't even have time to think how good or bad you are, and then somehow your body and mind
Right.
came.
There's a type of bodily osmosis that happens, right? And so it's in your body, right? It's a whole process that grows and develops.
Exactly, exactly. That happened also with the chanting. The Japanese monk Itsu-san, the Roshi's disciple, I just followed him around for 3 months. He never explained one thing, and then one day he just said, "You're leading the chanting the next day." And I was waiting for a list, when are the bells and how should I pronounce the name? And, here in 2 weeks you will be, no, tomorrow you, boom.
Wow.
I will, okay. You can't say no, really. Well, Westerners like like to have that choice, right? But yeah, you found out you could do something. You can do something that way. Just watching, and then you're on, and no time to take a position of
Yes.
I'll be pretty good at the beginning, and then I'll improve. You just do it.
Right. 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 And then also I think just to mention, I think that the Roshi was so tough on you, but I also think that there was probably this love that he was showing you in this way that was um, that you was probably really affected you in some way also. Even though he was so tough, I think there was something about it which was very powerful. Um, I don't know. Can you say something about that?
The Roshis, my opinion of Shodo Harada Roshi as an emotional person, if you can call that, is his love relationship, if you could call it, was with his master. He appeared at a very important time in Shodo Harada Roshi's life and gave him his first robe, after his father had passed away, and I think there was much more to serving Yamada Mumon Roshi than I want to do Zen and this is my boss, right? It was his deepest devotion
Yeah.
was there, and I think the Roshi, I didn't know it. I married, Shoda Harada. This is what ordination really was, and got a feeling what that's like. I mean, he can do that with many people. That's the form, but it was truly a feeling of this is my number one mirror. This is the thing that I sanzen to sanzen and
Yes.
encounter to encounter. This is what my life is. So sure, he took some time for that, but there was also a kind of, yeah, there was a lot of in the car, right, driving or something like that, or situations where you do have personal experiences. Um, there was sure some click there, obviously, where he shared some of his um, humor or yeah, just some of his views of more simple things that were very, warming. I mean, one time he did this. We would go read sutras around Okayama. That's part of the job as a monk, to go read sutras, and you go to 15 different houses and you drink tea 15 times, or hopefully not coffee, because then you have 5 or 6 coffees. That's not good for me. And
But you can't pee all day, probably, right? He won't let you go pee, right? You gotta.
there's a lot of issues on these days. Hidden besides all the sugar, but one day we got fed lunch, right? And I think this is a tradition, but he ate his portion, but he wanted to make our hostess feel good after our reading of the sutras, and he kept having me eat seconds, and I ate really a lot of food, and I was getting a little frustrated. And they had those thick mochi balls, with beans, rice. Oh yeah, he wants more. So and then and we get to the next house, and they also serve us lunch, and we go through the same we go through the same thing, right? Oh yeah, he wants more. And I'm starting to kind of breathe like in different ways, because the chanting anyways was difficult from the first lunch. And but you just, with this energetic person, and somehow you're able to do this, right, in a different way. And then I got through that lunch, and I was kind of getting pretty angry, and we got to the next house, and they served us lunch. And he didn't say no, right? We had to say yes. This is the Japanese thing a little bit. And he didn't really make me eat seconds, but I was very full, and I was like, I've had food like, in all the crannies of every part of possible. And we walked out of that house and we sat in the car and I was mad. And then there just came this kind of like really soft voice and it just said, good training.
Wow.
Yeah.
Love it.
And then we went on the rest of the day and, I digested, I survived.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And
Wow, wow. That's funny. Yeah, death by udon, right?
this, there were many situations where, that kind of camaraderie and that kind of sharing also, really, yeah, it was very supportive, I think. And there was a mutual sense. I think he knew he had someone who had a sense
Yes.
of devotion. He was very, very important to me.
Yes.
And we
Yeah.
went quite a ways, with this, we can talk about Whitby, but right, you
Yes.
know.
Okay. So could you say a little bit about koan work, and then I would love to move on to Tahoma after that, please.
Uh, well, after the Roshi, as I said before, he really doesn't want to give people koans right away unless they have some kind of base in their tanden, in their energy. And it took me quite a while to to relax around that process of learning breath or how to go in the interview and express breath and concentration. But once the koan came, the mu koan, somehow some energy clicked in a little deeper for me. So I could grab onto that a little more. So sometimes I think, and I've talked to quite a few people over the years about that, sometimes grabbing onto that koan has a fascination that brings our mind into it more. For some people, it might be listening to music or whatever, but for me, and then with the Japanese, I had a little Japanese. If I would look up the kanji, if I would really understand the words, I would go closer to it too, right? I mean, I could understand it better. But I understood the koans, and this is I say it in a very humble way. I didn't finish the koans, and I did 100 or 200, whatever, went through with the Roshi. But I always felt my true understanding of it was it's a tool for the Roshi to bring you closer to that place, and that's all. It's a tool for him to communicate his. It's not a quiz. It's really not. And so my experience was, for example, I was kind of feeling clear and straight in my energy and had gone through a couple of koans, and then I said what I was sure was gave a very clear expression, and I rejected me coldly, and that went on, and then my brain started attacking it in different ways and wondering how can I do it different. And this is, I think, the goal of the koan. If you still tend to doubt whether you're right, then he sends you all the places you have to go to come back. And so 3 weeks later, I came to the Roshi and I was silent for a couple of days. I had no answer. And then one day I just said what I had said 3 weeks ago. And then somehow he said, move me through. Like he always does, it's not right, but you move through to the next one. And so it was never about acknowledgement. Now you understand. Now you know. It was only his way of recognizing that you had stopped searching and become
Yes.
aware of the thing that was being talked about,
Yes.
and you were there.
Yes.
And he saw how if you had finesse or you were rough, but he in that sense he's a good teacher and was trying to also refine you to the degree. But that was one experience, and I had another experience where and this is probably the one that reminds me the most of koan work, where I knew I actually had to give the Roshi, I had to strike the Roshi, right? In my understanding, but I didn't want to strike the Roshi, right? I didn't have it in me to strike the Roshi. I sat at the waiting, and it's like I see it, but I don't feel it. Not there. And he doesn't want to you know it here. He wants to know that you can feel it and embody that that lack of subservience, right, to an authority, right, and you can stand in that energy with in your own power. So I went in and again was somehow that energy just wasn't coming through, and he chided me, right? He gave me some kind of scolding, and sort of like a slot machine, this arm kind of came down and gave him a good thwack, and he started screaming at me and sent me out of the room. And for 3 days, he did the same thing in a Japanese that must have, from 1,000 years ago, archaic Japanese. And I went in 3 days in a row, couldn't understand a word. And finally, after 3 days, I said to him as I bowed out, because I felt kind of good, even though he was being so harsh on me, something in me wasn't taking it so personally. And so I finally said, I can't understand what you're trying to communicate to me. And he said, you've been working on another koan for 2 days. Why do you keep telling me the answer to the last one? Because he had passed me on and I hadn't understood it. And I always think that he did that on purpose because he doesn't want any part of us to think we got some special understanding out of that. And smacking a roshi is not uh, just something you do every day. So if you really want to do the koans with a roshi and you really want to do it quite seriously, is really those experiences, and then it comes in waves of weeks sometimes of clarity on that, and there can come a koan or a situation that he feels it's time to develop you in a certain way, and then it's a half a year of just having you work on a koan, and you don't know where it's going. He's guiding you. You have to trust him, and then at some point you see all the possibilities. Some of those koans are so deep, they really go into the big ocean, and you have to visit that space and see all the delusions you can get yourself into in
Yes.
that space, and somehow feel you can eventually stay in the clear place, right?
Yeah. Love it. Love it. Um, okay. When I met you, that was at Tahoma, and whatever I brought to that was its own thing. But you know, seeing you there, and then later reflecting on that time when I was at Sogenji, reflecting back on Tahoma, I kind of just remember feeling like, wow, Tahoma could be better than this. It could be better than Sogenji. It could be a place where people come and they really heal, and it was a welcoming place, but still developing. But I really felt like Tahoma was a powerful place, and I hope that it would grow, and that it would become better. That was our hope with it, right? And anyway, could you talk a little bit about Tahoma, please?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we visited that. We started before I was even ordained. The Roshi sort of had this idea to go to Whidbey Island, and we visited people there. And I think in 1993 or four, I started coming over by myself to start meet people. He really wanted me to come over as soon as we had a piece of land and start to um, be a part of that. He saw me as someone who should be in the West, I think, and not take over it. My idea was being in a Japanese seaside temple and having a good life sometimes. But now once he pointed out to me that he would like me to um, be a part of that, I was interested and I was very honored, and I really put what I could into that. Tahoma is a beautiful piece of land, and a lot of the community was incredible. People came together, builders, architect, just people came. They wanted it to become something, and I was very lucky. We started in the Airstream trailer, right, and the porta potty, and I had my kind of wild kingdom experience, like the raccoons and all kinds of animals, lots of mice in the Airstream. Things I hadn't had to deal with in Japan. A lot of things, eagles like trapped in the lake, you have to kind of free them, or things that really were fantastic. Cutting a lot of trees, which was strange. Meeting the Native American tradition, they became a part of the foundation of that. Was really, and it was great to be kind of the emissary, right? To be the one kind of a big part of that.
Yes.
And I really thought I could manage what I. One year, just to answer your question more directly, we traveled to Jack Cornfield's place. Roshi was invited to lead a meditation, and he had 300 people every Monday night at his place, and um, the Roshi did a wonderful meditation there, and Jack Cornfield gave a very nice talk, and afterwards, Jack Cornfield talked about running his place. Right, he was obviously there was a big center there, and he said, "Roshi, we do Samu in America differently than in Japan." He said, "In the morning, we do meeting Samu. And in the afternoon, we do meeting Samu. And in the evening, we do evening meeting Samu." He just had his hands full with, all the difficult struggles that the Western people have building community, right? With hierarchy, challenges, structure, relationship issues are a big part of ethics committee. And I know the Roshi just was not interested in sorting out Westerners' problems on the level of relationship and not listening to all their problems with hierarchy and authority. It was not his thing, right? And he didn't really want us to have to deal too much with that either, which, I honor him for that. But I also noticed that young people were coming to me and older people with, wow, my wife just left me, or wow, I lost my job, or wow, I have no money. And these were situations I didn't have an inner vocabulary for. My Japanese training, I had a kind of like, okay, you sort that out, and one day you'll all come and put on a Japanese outfit, shave your head, and sit zazen with me. Was sort of my my attitude at first, and I noticed very quickly that that wasn't working like that, and I realized social work was important. We did a lot of things, right? We got involved in the community. We really did gather. Young people would come. I mean, it started to get an American flavor,
Yes.
right? It really did, and at the same time, it really would have taken a deeper structural analysis, right, to make that bridge from the Western dojo and the freedom within that Japanese style that we Westerners experience in Stogenji, and what could be possible at Whitby, what kind of outer structures, needed to be in place. I talked to a lot of ministers about, being a spiritual figure in the community. Lots. I mean, I had lots of conversation with lots of people. How do you do it? How are things organized? And those were topics I tried to present to the Roshi, and he really didn't want to do anything different than the Buddha had done it 2,500 years ago, if possible. That was where his heart was with building that, and I needed more communication, eventually. So that's, eventually what happened, right? I needed more feedback. I talked to many in the Theravada system about structure. I talked to many heads of Zen centers, and, they really said you really have to have a structure you have to have almost a legal system within your community.
Yeah.
And maybe the most important thing is you have to understand brotherhood, or community. We're doing this radical thing with men and women doing a monastic life. You really have to have an incredible understanding of brotherhood, right? Like, what is it to stay connected? How do people stay connected and trusting?
Yes.
And that wisdom we didn't get there
Yeah.
yet. I didn't get there, and that's why I went on pilgrimage, right, with those questions. Is that possible? Because my devotion was still to the Roshi. It was very sad to not be able to feel I was going to be able to fulfill that mission in
Yeah.
America under the form we were in. Right?
Yes. Yes. Well, that's really interesting. Yeah. Beautiful. Let's move on. Let's move on to you left training and went on pilgrimage. I'd love to hear that.
Right. Yeah. So after 15 years of, I couldn't just leave. I developed a sense that you know a certain amount of tenderness in my soul was getting very covered up by a certain tension about not understanding how to move forward. And so I told the Roshi I had three questions. I want to understand about other traditions, how they're doing things. Um, I want to understand more about relationships, like why are we going to do it the way we're doing it? And I wanted to know what it's like to be on my own without Sangha support. Like, who am I without this community around, without these, being sort of a figure, right, in the robes with the shaved head. I wasn't sure what I really wanted with that, but I certainly wanted to, yeah, see who I was outside of Japan and with the island and my parents' house, right? So those were the three things, and he supported that. He hoped, I think, I would come back and knew that it was a danger, and we had some very intense conversations. But then I got a ticket to India. My grandmother had left me some money, and it was running low. I was just, it wasn't much, but I had about $4,000 left, and I said, okay, I got to do it now and never, because if it goes down anymore, I can't do it. So I got a ticket to India, and I had heard about Arunachala, Ramana Maharshi, Tiruvannamalai, this place in South India, and somehow I just knew I should go there because that was a real meditator's mecca. And people who had left the Roshi were going there, and I heard other people had visited there. And I didn't know exactly. I mean, I couldn't pronounce Tiruvannamalai for like a month, but that's where I wanted to go. And Arunachala and Tiruvannamalai. And that's where I went. That's where I got to. And there were teachers and pilgrims and just a real mecca of spirituality around this mountain. And it's an amazing place. Every full moon, 500,000 Indian people walk around this mountain barefoot every month. And the ashram there has a lot of meditation energy. And I met very interesting teachers. I met Ajahn Sumedho. He was head of the London Buddhist Society. I had tea with him and asked him all my questions and spilled my guts. And yeah, he told me how difficult it was in England to get the Thai Buddhist organization to allow socks and sweaters. Like that took years of lobbying and pushing yourself through. And he understood so well my situation. That was very good. I met a guy named Werner who had been with Amma for many, many years and slept for, not slept, he meditated for 7 years in her basement in a 6 foot long hole with a little cubby for a toilet, and just lived there for 7 years and meditated with Amma visiting him occasionally. And he had a lot of experience with a great master. It was in the early days with Amma. He's a wonderful teacher who I shared a lot with, and he knew about practice. He's a real yogi. And yeah, and then I went down to Shantivanam. That's where Bede Griffith, he had a Catholic, Hindu meditation monastery, wonderful place, incredibly hot. And that was very special to meet that community and the heartfulness there. Then I went to the only Zen center in India. It was in the south. Met the Zen master there, and he told me a lot of his own. Ami Sami is a wonderful, wonderful man, but he also struggled. He's also a Catholic priest, and told me about his path. And did a session there. And then I came back to Tiruvannamalai and ran into Mario on the steps of
Okay.
the ashram there. You know, Mario I had met in Sogenji, and ran into him about 6 days in a row before we actually arranged a time to meet. And he knows the Roshi very well, and he really understood also my situation very well. He was already having hundreds of people attend his seminars at that time,
Yes.
and
Can you
yeah,
say exactly who he is, just real quick, so that people can know who he is?
yeah. Mario Mantese is works as Master M. He's a spiritual master here in Europe, in Switzerland, and because of, I think he's an interesting fellow because he was a musician with a very famous band Heatwave in the 70s, and he was a bass player and a groovy guy, and but he had made a sort of spiritual understanding inside himself that he needed to change his lifestyle, and a few days later he was stabbed in the heart with a knife and was dead for 6 or 8 minutes or something, and that was the beginning of an understanding of his own deeper spiritual journey, which was very deep and started in a very deep way. And he became physically handicapped, which he still is to a certain degree. He was actually paralyzed completely for a year. He was blind for almost a year and couldn't speak for that time, and experienced some deep silence. Anyways, 38 years later, you know, he's got 1,000 people coming to his darshan, to his talks, and yeah, he's the one who invited me to Europe. Actually, I had no desire to go. I really didn't want to meet another master. I really didn't want to deal with another group, or being free of sangha did feel quite good at that time. And Mario, I mean, there's just space. He didn't say anything. But then I went to Calcutta in India and spent 2 months with the missionaries of charity there. That was really fantastic. That was at Kaligat, and was working there with the dying, and got to live with the monks for a month and celebrate Easter with them. And I really deeply considered that monkhood. They were fantastic, going through the slums, so heartful, such an energy of service, such a good, healthy devotion, and serious work. I mean, you really get to be with the dying. You really get to work with people in the most terrible situations, with worms and their things, or you have to help with really situations that are kind of mind blowing until you've been there a little while. But I was allowed really in with the nuns and monks because of maybe my background, and really really appreciate that experience. But my stomach couldn't take it. The food, the spices, the dirt maybe of Calcutta. I needed to get away from there and think about how to get healthy. And I went to the Himalaya for about 3 weeks and got healthy, got rid of my giardia, it turned out to be. But I decided, I had this idea of getting healthy again with some bread and cheese in Europe. See some friends, get out of this thin sauce and rice thing for the last 5 months, and just visit Germany and see a few friends and eat some brown bread and cheese, and feel sort of solid in my stomach again. It was really my image at the time. And I thought, okay, sure, I'll see a seminar with Mario, at the time. And I came to Europe and it was so quiet. All of a sudden, you think there's like silent signs everywhere because India is just so loud and there's so much going on. And Germany was just clean and quiet and boring. And I really had no desire really to stay, because I had like my little tiny backpack with 4 pair of pants and 4 shirts and 4 pair of underwear, and I really hadn't gathered anything. I was really a pilgrim, and then I went to a seminar with to Mario, and he was was really something, right? It was really relaxed, and then I had a rapport with him, and you go up front in the darshan, right? You go have a meeting, and I've been to Sanzen with the Roshi 3,000 times. I can stand in front of a master, I thought, right? And kind of, but you're also in front of 500 people in the room, but all of a sudden you notice there's a power there that goes so deep in the heart that you feel you can really, you're seeing from this heart that's way down here. You know, it's really the ocean, right? You're not looking from the waves anymore. You're really looking from the ocean. And then, you know, he does his thing in silence. He really doesn't. He does speak and he writes books, but it's really, his silence is really where the work takes place. And you know, I really could feel my legs actually were going back and forth. And I was like, what are you doing there? And then he kind of stopped it. And then this energy came into my tanden actually from there. And I just got warm. And he called me up to the stage and looked down and he said, you want to have dinner tonight? And I said, yeah, okay, yeah, I'll have dinner. And so then he introduced me to some nice people. And so I got some dental work done. Um, and then I traveled all over Europe for about a year, actually, meeting old Zen friends that we had met over the many years. And right, and it started, yeah, just trying to figure it out still. It took me about a year asking the question, what am I going to do? Where is this going? Money is really getting low, you know. And so then um, I was invited to take care of a cat on a beautiful piece of land in the south of France by some people who had been to Sogenji and learned Japanese pottery. And they said I could stay in their place for 3 months and look after their cat. And I thought, okay, I'm going to meditate for 3 months and think about this and come out clear. And I went there for 3 months and had a really, it was winter and I took a lot of walks, meditated a lot, listened to some music, some Freddie Mercury once in a while, kind of get some power going, you know, because just me and the cat after 3 months, you know, once you want to hear some music. But then I started to really ask like loud. You know, you're alone a lot. You can talk to yourself, and I really started to ask, you know, the universe, where is this going? Like, where is this going? Like, where is this going? And is gave you know filled my energy with this question and all the doubt that came with it. And the next morning was an email for me and a job offer to work on an old mill in the middle of Bavaria in the countryside and to go work with kids. And the interesting thing was, after I had made this long prayer, that was what came, was young people. I really, in 40 years old, and I had never, you know, met we had kids from the Waldorf school at Tahoma. I'd gone with Japanese kids to Saipan for some things. But to really be with kids was, I had missed it. I had missed it. And so there was then this email the next day with this job offer to come and work on this old mill with kids. And I thought, okay. And it kind of went on like that was where I was meant to go, to work with the young people. And
Yes.
16 years later, yeah, still doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. And the shiatsu was a part of that.
Yeah, that actually was an important development. One of the motivations that uh, the woman had who asked me the job, she didn't have any workers, but she was an amazing youth worker herself. And I saw her and she knew she felt seen, but she also had rheumatism. And so, and the mill at that time where I worked, it's called Leistmühle. The the mill was 300-year-old building and it had really thin windows. And it worked. The electricity was work on the stream. So if leaves got like nothing worked if there were leaves in the stream in the turbine, you know.
Wow.
And it was cold in the house, you know, wood fire in many places of the house, and it wasn't good for her. So she got some rheumatism things, and she's a very sensitive person. And I started working, you know, with some qigong and some energy and so forth, and putting my hands on, and it seemed to help. And so she had me one day work with one of the kids, just put my hands on the way I had, and this 9-year-old girl, of course, Christina was there at the time, and I did my little thing, and this 9-year-old girl sits up, and Christina asks her how it was, and she says, in German, Bavarian actually, she says, Shoshe, and Shoshe is Bavarian for schon schön, which means it was very beautiful. But I thought it meant like shit because Shoshe sounds like crap. It doesn't sound in my language. So I didn't think she really appreciated or felt anything. But then I was gradually allowed to do that with people. But then I had another experience actually right after a Mario seminar where one of our kids who I'd worked very intensely with was hit by a bicycle. He actually flew into the windshield, and then the young lady hit the brakes and he flew about 20 feet. And I went to the emergency or the intensive unit. If I had come back from the Mario, I got the news on the Monday. I went to the hospital and he was full of 11 different tubes and had some weird thing in his leg, and they said he's paralyzed. I said okay, but I asked if I could come back just to be there for the mother and be there with him. But he was asleep. He was 4 days. He was out. He was in a coma for about 4 days. And I went. I went in the next day, and for whatever reasons, I was in a fairly, I think, a very selfless place. I put my hand on him, and I felt I could clearly understand that his energy had pulled back to the bone, but it wasn't gone. It was alive, but it was just pulled back. And so I ended up going to the intensive unit every day. They let me bring music. I brought some avopeat, some classical music, and they kind of watched me every day, just put my hands on him. And um, and I don't want to try to put into words what was going on exactly, but there was a lot of love in my heart when I was doing that, and I had a deep connection to him, and so it worked. Whatever worked, then eventually there was some spastic movement. They said, "Oh, that's nothing," and then at some point, he actually over a couple months and some rehabilitation, but I stayed with the process, and yeah, so then I convinced myself that I can do something in that direction because the Roshi didn't train me to be to do this kind of work. So, and I asked Mario, but he didn't answer. He's not interested in giving anybody not telling him what to do, anything like that. You have to figure it out for yourself with these masters. So I just said, okay. And then Christina said, why don't you try Shiatsu? And then I went and I thought, yeah, okay. Because you need a form to tell people what you're doing.
Right.
I'm going to put my hands on you, you're going to be fine. And it's not true also. You're not always in that same place of perfect love and healing and the expectation, all of that, right? I mean, I tried, of course, a little bit, but that was meant to be. It was a situation that helped me to get and helped him, but it was meant to kind of happen so that I could understand what might be good for me. And then I found actually it was a student of the Roshis who was in. I went down to see the Roshi in Sicily, and Akin, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And she did shiatsu, and I asked her who's the best in Europe. She told me Sasaki. I looked up Sasaki, and one of his top disciples is in Regensburg, about 40 minutes from here, and he was starting a training, and so it all kind of happened, and he became my good friend, and then I started doing shiatsu and bring a little zazen to the shiatsu group, and so
Yes.
that worked.
Yes. Wonderful. With the remaining time, let's talk about what the take home is about all this and what's going on for you now. What's next? What's the next chapter? Where are we going?
Uh, you know, yeah, I'm right there where I always was. I don't know. It's just always amazing, you know, but when the brain tries to figure it out, right? I have a good job. I've had a good job. I give some courses in a hospital, which I always wanted to do. Um, just regeneration for hospital workers and I do some things in schools, for the Montessori school. I've done that for 14 years. I did three trips to India, right, with teenagers
Yeah.
to learn about meditation and social work, and
Yes.
um, none of those things I started. Okay, I'm going to go to Germany and do this, that, and the other, right? It sort of unfolded the way it is, and I want to. I'd rather not try to force it too much, but I also have a great partner, over 10 years now, and that I don't know how that happened either. And that's deepened, to a very wonderful place. And I'm still working on that. Actually, Germany, psychotherapy is born here, right? I mean, when you want to bring the heart into your practice, in German, that's called therapy. Therapy is a tough word for many people, right? Some people need it to be just art, right? But I think I've met so many incredibly interesting people who do therapy, right? That I really have lost my allergy to the word. And I visit a man. His name is Hunter Beaumont, who's a psychotherapist from Los Angeles who came here 40 years ago to beat the wave of materialism and raise his kids here. And he's a deeply spiritual guy who integrates spiritual practice with his therapy. And his crowning work is to bring tango, relationship, and tango. Yeah, tango for me. Tango into like how to recognize where you're at, like in this intimacy, this close. Where am I at? Where's this other person at? And what are they? What's going on here? Am I centered? And this is interesting for me at the moment.
Yeah.
This is,
Love it.
and uh, and that's another thing that really was hard for me in Zen. I danced in public twice, and twice people gave me a hard time for that. And I think that this is probably the dance has to be there for me. And so I think if you feel your life is dancing, I think it's a great place to see you got where you're kind of supposed to go. If you have dance in your life and you're feeling the dance, you're feeling it. It wasn't easy for me to feel the dance in tango. I'm not going after that, but there's something beautiful happening in the dance there too. I mean, it's not the only dance. I've done Buto, I've done some things here, but sometimes it's just that you're dancing, the way you're living, the way you're working, the way you're walking through back to almost the way you saw the Roshi, right? Just
Yeah.
your life is, you remember the Roshi used to walk on the roofs, when I used to,
Yeah.
walk on the highest roof of the Hondo, just walk like right across the tiles on the top, like it was Peter Pan. And
Yeah.
sometimes,
I never saw that.
yeah, he hurt his back at some point.
Yeah.
He was, quite a. Sometimes our lives are also like that. It doesn't have to be so physically amazing, right? If I meet Hunter or these, it's all older, very mature people. You're just dancing with them and dancing with other people and seeing how they communicate to you, taking feedback that maybe you're not feeling this, you feel nervous or centered or that you improved, but then where does that go and how do you integrate that information and how
Yeah.
do you how do you strive without becoming attached? And I think this Zen koan that I knew I left the monastery with and would always carry is this true man of no rank, right? Like like really not getting stuck in a position, not really not whether you're the lowest monk or the head monk or whether you're a boss or an employee or the therapist or the client, just not being so stuck there and getting resentment, right? Blocking the situation and then not, you know, it's, can be more loving this life and this is the limitation of Zen for me, right? That I couldn't find that vocabulary, maybe because it's a Western person's need, I'm not sure, but in that sense I'm 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 satisfied, right? I'm content to how things worked out and where it's going. I hope I see you there.
Oh, well, Well, I think this is really wonderful, and I'm so excited to see, where, it doesn't matter. I'm so excited that you exist in the world, and that I'm hoping that people can look at this video and they can see, maybe they had some ideas about what Zen is, and maybe some rigid ideas, and seeing the kind of unique flavor of, I think, how you've approached it, how it changed you, the depth of it, and then seeing it flourish, and just that your unique spark to it, I think can be really helpful to people. So that was kind of my hope, to have you on here to reveal that aspect of Zen. That, again, I talk about this, but when I met you, I saw, oh, there's a type of liberation, a type of freedom and excitement, and that's what Zen is kind of about. And there are a lot of details there. There's a lot of form. There's all that, but seeing that spark that you have has been so inspiring to me. So I'm hoping that people will see that, and that'll come through a little bit. I think it has. And I love you, Yusan.
Yeah, a little appreciation with me goes a long way. Thank you.
Oh, well,
It was very strange to do this. I really kind of happy now that you asked, because I like telling you stories, I guess. So.
yeah, well,
Thank you.
yes,
Yeah.
thank you. And I'm sad because Yusan was going to come visit here in next month, and he's not able to. So we're gonna postpone that for a little while. But I hope to see you soon, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you,
Uh,
Corey.
uh,
Yeah. Love to you and your family.
okay, thank you, and love to Florentina too, please.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Bye bye, and thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
We'll see you soon.
Okay, see you soon. Great, thank you.